One big dispute between Catholics and Protestants, which it goes back to history, is the common dispute over the role and title of the apostles. This debate has become more and more prominent because of the accusation that the apostles were not priests. If this were the case, this would seemingly make most of the apostolic churches, including the Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Oriental Orthodox Church, and others, out to be engaging in innovations. So is this true? First argument that many Protestants make against the priesthood of the Catholic Church, that Christ is said to be the consummation of the Old Covenant priesthood, as is clearly stated in St. Paul's letters to the Hebrews. Furthermore, the apostles are not called priests, nor is anyone called a Christian priest in the New Testament, leading many to believe that this is an innovation of the Catholics and that the priesthood falls under the ceremonial laws of the Old Covenant, which have been fulfilled in Christ. However, this is a chief misunderstanding. Much of this argument goes around the fact that most scriptures translate the Greek word for the title that the apostles had as elder, not priest. But this is foolish, since an elder is a title for the priesthood. In the same manner that a general or a captain is a title for a soldier, calling such a person by that title does not strip one of the nature of their office as a soldier. And the same logic goes for the priesthood. Furthermore, while the scriptures never explicitly call them priests, it is made very clear throughout that ministers hold the role of priest. First, because Christ himself says, "Do this in remembrance of me." And St. Paul calls the ministers of the church ambassadors to Christ. But Christ, as St. Paul says in the letter to the Hebrews, therefore anyone who takes up the office or sacramental duties of Christ must also be called a priest in a subordinate manner. More, it is said in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14, quote, "Having therefore a great high priest that hath passed into the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast to our confession." Here, the sense of the word confession denotes a creed or promise. Therefore, if their creed or promise related to the priesthood of Christ, it must therefore be said that the New Testament Christian ministers were indeed priests. Interestingly, the King James Version of the Bible, often praised by Protestants, changes the word confession to profession, which is interesting because this actually does more in this translation to support the Catholic position, as a profession is generally understood as an office or role. This principle is further supported in Hebrews chapter 3, verse 1, which reads, quote, "Wherefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly vocation, consider the apostle and high priest of our confession, Jesus." But this isn't the only place where St. Paul lays down the standards for a priest. In Hebrews chapter 5, verse 1, he says, quote, "For every high priest taken from among men is ordained for men for the things that appertain to God, and that he may offer up gifts and sacrifices for sins." Now, can it be said that early apostles in their ministerial roles being just this, making spiritual sacrifices and offering heavenly gifts? Yeah, that sounds exactly like what they were doing in the early church. Therefore, it must be said that the priesthood relates to their office, according to the standard that St. Paul gives in this verse. Furthermore, the early church fathers overwhelmingly supported the idea the early church ministers were indeed priests. St. Irenaeus, Tertullian, and St. Cyprian of Carthage all supported the idea these early offices belonged to the priesthood. Now, some try to object by bringing up 1 Peter chapter 2, in which St. Peter calls all Christians to be priests, but this is largely a straw man of the Catholic position. It's very clear that St. Peter is making a distinguishment here with the common priesthood, wherein every man is called to make personal spiritual sacrifices. Therefore, with that being said, let us profess the ministers of the church today are rightly called priests, and that they have maintained these offices and faculties since the beginning of the church. If you like what you see in this video, please like and subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more upcoming videos.